The forklift I keep talking about wasn't really a forklift. It was an 11,000-pound Taylor big truck lift with forks wide enough to cradle a Jersey barrier lengthwise. And I'd run it so many years, I could set a 10-foot section of concrete down on a chalk line without so much as a scuff. That evening, I brought one across the main entrance of the plant, easing it off the forks at an angle so it lay hard against the gatepost on one end and blocked the drive on the other. The tires chirped once on the old apron. Then the barrier settled with that low, final sound heavy concrete makes when it's done arguing with you. And the main gate, the wide one, the one every flatbed I'd ever loaded had rolled through, was finished as a vehicle entrance. My wife Diane stood by our car with the engine still ticking. Our daughter Kayla was getting our grandson out of the back seat, and the boy, Owen, was rubbing his eyes and looking up at all that concrete like he'd landed on the moon. Diane watched me kill the lift and climb down. She didn't say anything foolish. She never has. She just looked at the barrier lying across the only real way in and out and said, "And if we need to get back out?" "Then I move it again," I said. That was the whole of my thinking right there. And I want you to hold on to it. Because it took me longer than it should have to understand what was wrong with it. If I could set it, I could pull it. A thing I moved in was a thing I could move back out. 30 years of running iron over concrete had taught me that a problem you can put a machine on is a problem you already have licked. You just haven't finished the job yet. The name's Frank Delacroix, though everybody at the plant just called me Del or Frank. And around town, I was the barrier man from Halverson Precast out on the river bottom. We made highway product. Jersey barriers by the hundreds, box culverts, retaining blocks, drainage sections, bridge deck panels when the contract called for them. If you drove the interstate anywhere in 3 counties, you'd steered between concrete that came off our casting beds. I ran the yard. I knew what weighed what would tip, what would hold, and which lift would kill a man if you rigged it lazy. I was 59 that fall, with a bad shoulder and good hands. And I had believed my whole working life that the most useful thing a man could be was somebody who could look at a mess and say, "I can move that." We came to the yard because home stopped being a place you could stay. It happened in pieces, the way I imagine it did everywhere. First, it was on the radio, out of the city upriver, people sick, then people violent. Then a word the announcer kept sanding the edges off of until you could hear he didn't want to say what he was seeing. Then the interstate started backing up. And when the interstate backs up, it bleeds. Cars came off the ramps and filled the state highway. And when the highway clogged, they came down into the neighborhoods, our neighborhood, idling nose to tail down streets that were never built for it. People blew through stop signs. A man knocked our neighbor's mailbox flat and didn't slow down. The grocery on the corner emptied out in an afternoon, and the gas station put up a hand-lettered sign, then took the sign down and just locked the pumps. Kayla lived 20 minutes away, over near the clinic where she worked as a physical therapy aide. She showed up at our door a little after 4 with Owen and a duffel bag. And her face told me she'd already seen more than she was going to say in front of the boy. Her ex was 3 states away and no help to anybody. So it was the 4 of us. And I stood in my own driveway listening to traffic that wouldn't stop and horns that meant panic instead of impatience. And I thought about where a man goes when the roads themselves have turned against him. I thought about the yard. It sat out on the industrial edge where the town gives up. And the river bottom takes over flat, black farmland, running west to a line of grain elevators, the old state highway on one side, a dead rail spur cutting through, the levee road humping along the water. There was a concrete batch plant a half-mile down that shared our rail siding. And past that, a row of warehouses that had been empty since before I hired on. Nobody had a reason to be out there. That was the point of it. The yard had chain link all the way around, a couple of vehicle gates, open sight lines in every direction because you can't sneak up across a bean field. And it was stacked corner to corner with the heaviest inventory in the county. A batch of new barriers had been waiting on a contract that was never going to get poured now. Culvert sections, retaining block, bridge panels on the casting beds under tarps. And it had the machines. The Taylor lift, a cat front loader, the yard gantry crane that ran on rails down the main casting alley, 2 flatbed trailers, the maintenance shed with the welder and the torch, a diesel tank that had been topped off the week before because I'm the kind of man who tops off the tank. There was an old admin building cinder block, flat roof, road crew office with a bathroom and a break room, and a couch nobody had thrown out in 20 years. I didn't think of it as a fortress. I want that clear. I thought of it as somewhere to sit for a night or two, off the roads, behind a fence, until the traffic drained, and we could see which direction was worth driving. A day, maybe 2. That's the truth of what I planned, and I'd ask you to remember it, because almost nothing that happened afterward was planned at all. We got there before full dark. I keyed the padlock on the small pedestrian gate, drove both vehicles in through the side entrance, and then I went and got the Taylor and shut the main gate the only way it could really be shut. That's the barrier Diane asked her question about. Then I stood in the yard with my family and listened. And for the first time in hours, I couldn't hear traffic. Just wind coming across the beans and, far off, the sound of the town coming apart the way a town does when nobody's answering the phones anymore. Owen wanted to know why there were so many walls. They're not walls, I told him. They're barriers. They go on the road. Why are they here then? Caleb put a hand on his head and steered him toward the office. Because Grandpa made them and nobody came to get them yet, she said, which was close enough to true. And the boy accepted it the way kids accept things when they're tired and it's getting dark. I got the office livable that first night, more or less by instinct. There was a generator, but I didn't run it. No sense advertising. We used flashlights and 1 battery lantern. Diane found the couch and the 2 cots the crews kept for storms. And she laid out a sleeping arrangement in the break room where there were no outside windows, just the interior glass looking onto the yard. Kayla checked the water. The building was on a well with a pressure tank, and the pump ran on the generator. So we had what was in the tank and whatever I could pull off the emergency drums in the shed. Not endless. Manageable if we were careful, which I intended to be. I slept maybe 3 hours. Sometime before dawn, I was up walking the fence line, and that's when I started actually seeing the yard the way I'd need to. The chain link was fine for keeping out a wandering man, but a fence is a suggestion, not a stop. The real strength of that place was lying all around me in rows. I had, sitting in the north lot alone, better than 200 Jersey barriers 10-foot sections, some the standard height, some the taller version we'd poured for a median job. Each one better than 2 tons. You do not push 2 tons of concrete out of your way. You do not ram through it in a pickup. And keep going. A barrier does exactly one thing, and does it without thinking, tirelessly, forever. It decides where a moving thing is allowed to go. I spent that first full day making the yard decide things. The main gate was already closed with the 1 section. For the side vehicle entrance, the one we'd driven in through, I didn't want to seal it completely, because a sealed yard is a trap. And I'd rather control a door than brick up a wall. So I set 2 barriers to make an offset. One from the left, jutting most of the way across. Then, 10 feet farther in, one from the right, jutting the other way. A chicane, same as you'd build at a work zone to slow traffic through the cones. A vehicle could still get in, but it had to nose left, then hard right, crawling, no speed. Nothing could come through that opening, faster than a walk. And anything trying it fast would put itself broadside against more than 2 tons of concrete and stop being a problem. The pedestrian gate I left as it was, narrow, with a length of pipe I could drop across it in 3 seconds. By mid-afternoon, I stepped back and looked at what I'd done and felt the thing I'd felt my whole life at the end of a good lift. Not pride exactly, more like rightness. The kind of quiet you get when the load is set and the chains go slack and you know it's not going anywhere. My family was inside a system now. I'd taken the mess of the world and given it a set of rules made out of concrete. And concrete does not get tired and does not panic and does not change its mind at 3 a.m. If stories about ordinary people trying to make one practical decision at a time are the kind you stay with, I'd be glad to have you subscribe and ride along. Because when I set that first barrier across the gate, I honestly believed the only question I'd ever face out there was who I let in. It didn't occur to me for a long while that the harder question would be what all that concrete was worth to somebody standing on the wrong side of it. The first infected I saw up close came along the industrial road the second morning. There were maybe 5 of them, spread out, moving the way I'd learned they always moved, not fast unless they had a reason, just persistent, drawn along by whatever noise or motion had them pointed our way. I'd run the loader for a minute to reposition a barrier, and I think that's what brought them. They came up the shoulder and reached the fence and pressed against it. And one of them followed the chain link along until it hit the corner where the offset barrier started, and then it just stopped making progress. It didn't climb. It didn't reason. It pushed against the concrete, and the concrete didn't care. And after a while, the motion of another one, farther down the fence, pulled its attention, and it wandered off that direction, following the line of the barrier exactly the way the barrier meant for it to. That's what a Jersey barrier does to a car that clips it at an angle, deflects it, redirects it, keeps it in its lane. It did the same thing to those people. They hit the concrete and slid along it and got sent somewhere else. And not one of them figured out the chicane. They'd come in the offset opening and turn wrong and end up nosed against a barrier face, confused, and eventually drift back out. I watched the whole thing from the office steps with a cup of instant coffee going cold in my hand. And I'm not proud of what I felt. But I'll tell you the truth. I felt validated. Everything I knew still worked. The world had changed its whole nature overnight, and the physics hadn't. Concrete still weighed what it weighed. A moving body still went where the geometry told it to go. I could not fix the sickness, and I could not fix the roads. But I could look at a problem shaped like, where do these people go? And I could answer it in tons. Diane came out and stood beside me and watched them wander the fence line. They can't get through, I said. No, she said. I can see that. She didn't say it like it settled anything. She said it like she was already thinking about the part I wasn't. The next 2 days we became a household again, in a strange industrial way. Diane ran payroll and the front desk at the elementary school for 26 years before she retired. And what that job really made her was a person who remembered everybody and noticed who was struggling. She turned the break room into some place you could live. She rationed without making it feel like rationing. She got Owen onto a schedule so the boy wouldn't spend the whole day scared. Kayla inventoried what we had, the food we'd brought, the first aid kit from the shed, the water math, and she was good at it. Calm and specific. the way she was calm and specific, getting a stroke patient to trust her enough to stand up. Owen decided the barriers needed names. Or not names exactly. He decided the rows needed counting. And then he decided each row was a different thing. The north stack was the big wall. The offset at the side gate was the crooked part. He walked the rows with a piece of casting bed chalk and drew on the concrete a dog, a truck, his mother, a lopsided sun. And he counted. And he'd come tell me numbers. 41 in the big wall. He was off by a lot, but I never corrected him. Diane said let him have a job. So the barriers became his, in the way a place becomes a kid's when he's the only one small enough to think it's an adventure. On the fourth day, the road crew came. I heard the truck before I saw it, a diesel dually laboring up the industrial road, riding low. It slowed at the main gate, saw the concrete, and came onto the side entrance. And I was already walking out because I knew the sound of a work truck the way you know a family member's footstep. It nosed into the offset, took the left, took the hard right, crept through slow because there was no other way to take it, and stopped in the yard. 2 men, and part of a third one, riding hurt in the middle seat, climbed down. The lead was a fellow named Ort Bushweiler, though everybody called him Bush. And I knew him the way you know somebody you've done business with for 15 years. He'd been a maintenance lead for the state, then contract. And he'd ordered barriers off this very yard more times than either of us could count. Big square man, gray stubble, moved like his knees hurt. With him was a younger one, Reyes, 30s, who I didn't know but who had operator hands, you can tell, the way a man looks at your equipment. The hurt one was a kid, road crew flagger, ankle turned bad and swelling in his boot. Not bitten, just a man who'd stepped wrong running from something. Bush looked at the offset he'd just driven through and then at me and almost smiled. You built a work zone. Slows them down, I said. Slows everybody down. He looked around the yard, at the stacks, at the loader, and I watched something settle over his face that I didn't understand yet. Relief, but a working man's relief, the kind you feel when you find the one tool you need in a job that's gone all to hell. Frank, he said. I about drove past. Then I remembered whose yard this was. I got them water. Kayla looked at the kid's ankle and got his boot off before it had to be cut off, which he was grateful for. And Bush told me what he'd come to tell me, and it changed everything, though it took the shape of a road problem, which is the only shape I ever really knew how to hear. The main westbound way out of the region ran across the river on the old highway bridge, and just short of the approach, there'd been a wreck, a loaded tractor-trailer jackknifed across the lanes. Nobody's fault. Just a man who'd tried to run a jam and lost it. It didn't take the bridge down. The bridge was fine, but the rig sat crossways at the narrowest part of the approach, where the road came up on a fill between a stormwater channel on one side and the guardrail drop on the other. And the wreck plus the stalled traffic behind it had squeezed the whole thing down to one exposed lane. People could get through that lane, on foot or crawling in a vehicle, but it ran right past a strip of dead businesses, a gas station and a farm store and a couple of others. And infected were coming out of there and onto the shoulder, coming right at the only path out. There's people stacked up on the near side, Bush said. Vehicles out of gas, families, old folks. Some church van, I think. Maybe 40, 50 people that can't get across because the second they get out and walk that lane, they're walking straight past whatever's coming out of that strip mall. So clear the strip mall, I said, which was a foolish thing to say, and I knew it as it left my mouth. Bush just looked at me. Reyes looked at his boots. We can't clear anything, Bush said, but we could give 'em a wall to walk behind. Set barrier down that exposed stretch, right along the shoulder, between the people and the buildings. A protected lane. They keep the concrete between them and whatever's coming out of those doors, and they walk it right onto the bridge. He paused. It's a work zone, Frank. It's the exact thing this stuff was poured to do. Guide people past the danger. And then he said the part I'd already felt coming. The way you feel a load starting to shift before you hear it. Nearest barrier stockpile to that approach, he said, is standing right here in your yard. I want to tell you I understood, in that moment, everything the rest of this was going to cost. I didn't. What I understood was simpler, and it went off in me like a dropped wrench. Those barriers weren't spare inventory anymore. They weren't product waiting on a contract. They were my walls. They were the reason those 5 sick people had wandered off down the fence instead of coming through it. They were the things standing between the industrial road and my grandson, drawing a lopsided sun in casting bed chalk. And Bush was standing in my yard, telling me they were needed somewhere else. Telling me, without meaning any offense at all, that the thing keeping my family alive was also the thing that could keep 40 strangers alive, and that it couldn't be both at once, and that he'd come to ask me for it. I made those barriers, I said. It came out flatter than I meant it. I know what they can do. They stay here. Bush nodded slowly. He didn't argue. That was the worst of it. He didn't argue, because he understood me. He'd have said the same in my boots. He drank his water and said they'd rest an hour and take the kid on to wherever they were headed. And he didn't push. And that made it sit in my chest heavier than pushing would have. Diane heard the whole thing from the office steps. She didn't say anything then either. If a single row of concrete were the only thing standing between your granddaughter and the noise coming up the road, how many pieces of that wall would you load onto a flatbed for people you couldn't see and would probably never meet? I'm not going to answer it for you. I couldn't answer it for myself, not that day. Bush and Reyes and the kid didn't leave, as it turned out. The kid couldn't be moved on that ankle without making it worse. And by the time the hour was up, the industrial road had gotten busier in the wrong way. That was the thing I hadn't accounted for, that as the main routes clogged, people would come looking for anything that looked like a way through, and heavy equipment moving behind a fence looks, from a distance, like somebody who knows what he's doing. A minivan came up the road and slowed at the gate and idled there a long minute before moving on. Then a sedan did the same. Then a delivery box truck, one of the little ones, came up the road too fast, saw the main gate blocked, tried to whip into the side entrance without slowing, and put its front corner square into the first offset barrier at maybe 20 miles an hour. The barrier didn't move. It's not supposed to move. That's the whole idea. The truck's fender crumpled and it slewed sideways and stalled halfway into the chicane. And the driver sat there stunned, while the concrete that had just stopped him sat there not caring at all. He got out eventually, shaken. And I talked to him through the fence. A man alone, scared, looking for gas or shelter or just somebody in charge, and I told him there was no room, which was true, and pointed him back toward town, which felt like a lie even though it wasn't. But here's the thing that mattered. The box truck was now stuck in my side entrance, blocking my one controllable vehicle door. Reyes was on his feet before I'd finished the fence conversation. "Loader," he said. Not a question. And I want to be fair to the man, he could run equipment. We chained onto the box truck's frame and I ran the cat and we dragged that thing out of the chicane and shoved it up against the fence, where it became, more or less by accident, another barrier. Reyes eyeballed the offset afterward and said, "You want the second one 3 foot deeper. Make 'em commit to the turn before they can see the gate." He was right. I moved it 3 feet deeper. That night, I lay on the office floor listening to the diesel tick as it cooled, and I thought, the yard works. The box truck proved it. Everything I'd built had done its job. And that made Bush's request harder, not easier, because now I had evidence. Now I could say, out loud and honestly, these barriers already saved us once, and mean it. I brought Bush 12. I didn't decide it in some noble moment. I decided it the way I decide everything, by looking at the yard and doing the math. 12 sections I could pull off the south end without touching the perimeter that mattered. 12 I could load onto one flatbed in a morning without burning through my diesel. 12 was what I could afford and still look at my own gate and believe in it. I've got 12, I told Bush. He rubbed his jaw. 12 gets us halfway down that stretch. Halfway's the far end, past the gas station. First half's still exposed. Then make halfway count, I said. Put 'em where the worst of it is. People can run the near part. It's the far part past those doors that's killing them. He looked at me a long moment, and then he nodded. Because a man who's worked roads his whole life knows you take the concrete you can get, and you put it where the bodies are. And you don't lecture the man giving it to you about the pieces he's keeping. The loading was the best I'd felt since we'd driven in. I won't pretend otherwise. I got the Taylor warmed up, and Reyes ran the loader, and we picked the 12 sections off the south stack one at a time. Each barrier had its cast-in lifting points, 2 loops of rebar sunk in the top, engineered to take the load, and we hooked the 4-leg chain, and I brought each one up smooth, watching the chains take the strain. Watching the barrier lift level, no swing, no drama, and swung it over onto the flatbed while Reyes guided the butt end down onto dunnage. 12 times. The morning went gray-gold with diesel exhaust and concrete dust and the smell of the river coming across the beans. And for 2 hours, the whole ruined world narrowed down to weight and clearance and the slow, honest work of setting heavy things exactly where they needed to go. Owen watched the entire thing from the office glass, with his palms flat on the window. Diane watched it too. And she watched me more than the load. And she didn't say anything until we'd chained the last section down and Bush was cinching the straps. Then she came and stood next to me and said, quiet, "You've been out here since before it was light." "Big load," I said. She looked at me a while. "You know, you talked more to Ort Bushweiler about how to place those 12 than you've talked to anybody about the 40 people they're for." I didn't have an answer for that, so I did what I always did. I found something to check. I went and checked the chains. If you've come this far with me, I'm grateful. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, ordinary people trying to make something useful out of what they happen to know, you're welcome to subscribe and stay for the rest of it. Because I thought sending those 12 barriers would make the whole thing easier, one way or the other. I thought I'd either feel better or feel done. Instead, loading that flatbed showed every soul on that road exactly what was standing behind my fence. Bush's crew ran the 12 out that afternoon and the near half of the next day. And Reyes went with them because they needed an operator on that end. And I stayed with my family and told myself that was that. My donation, my contribution, 12 sections and a good conscience. Then the report came back over Bush's handheld, patchy but clear enough. The lane worked. They'd set the 12 down the worst of the stretch, past the gas station and the farm store, and once there was concrete between the people and the doors, the people moved. An older couple crossed first. Bush said the old man went ahead testing the ground with a cane, and his wife came behind with a hand on his belt. The two of them walking a protected lane past things that would have had them in the open 30 seconds earlier. A van got through. A father carried a sleeping girl the length of it and never woke her. I sat on the office steps and listened to a man tell me, in road crew shorthand across a bad radio, that a father had carried his sleeping child past a gas station full of the dead because of 12 pieces of concrete. I'd pulled off my south stack, and I couldn't make the people outside be abstract anymore. That was the trouble with the report. 12 barriers had turned into an old man's cane and a girl who never woke up. And then the yard started to change, because the people who got through told the people who hadn't yet where the concrete came from. The first vehicle came just before dark that same day. A station wagon, a woman driving, a teenage son, an old man in the back who turned out to be her father. They came up the industrial road slow and stopped at the side entrance and didn't try the chicane, just waited, headlights on, until I walked out. The woman rolled her window down halfway. "They said there was a plant," she said, "with the barriers. My cousin got across on the road they built. She said, come here, they'll..." She stopped. She didn't actually know what she'd been told they'd do. She just knew this was the place the concrete came from. And in a world where nothing was working, the place the concrete came from was as good a direction as any. I looked at them a long moment. The woman had the flat, scraped-out look of somebody who'd been driving toward one closed door after another all day. The kid was staring at the loader like it was a spaceship. The old man in the back was asleep, or wanted to look asleep. I had them pull into the offset and stop between the barriers, the way the whole thing was built to make them stop. And I looked at them from behind the second section where they couldn't rush me, and I couldn't be surprised. And I saw that the system worked for this too. It didn't just stop the sick. It made a scared stranger sit still long enough for a scared man to think. The concrete turned chaos into a line. And feeling how neatly the layout made a human problem hold still was, though I couldn't have told you so at the time, exactly the thing that was wrong with me. Because a human problem holding still isn't a human problem solved. It just looks the same from where I was standing. I let them in. The mother Renata turned out to have run a hospital cafeteria, which meant she could feed 30 people out of nothing and not lose her mind. And inside a day, she and Diane had the break room turned into something like a kitchen. The teenage boy, Marcus, wasn't much use yet, but he wasn't afraid of work. The old man, her father, had spent 40 years as a diesel mechanic. And when he woke up, he took one slow walk around my equipment, wiped his hands on a rag he produced from somewhere, and told me the loader had a slow weep in the lift cylinder I'd been ignoring for a month. Then he fixed it, sitting on an overturned bucket, complaining the whole time. They weren't the last. By the end of the next day, there were 3 more vehicles, a pair of families who tried the bridge and turned back, and a man alone who turned out to be an electrician, and who, before I'd even decided to trust him, had my generator wired to run the office and a string of the yard's old sodium lights off one circuit without lighting up the whole place like a beacon. Small light, controlled light, enough to work by. By the 3rd day past Bush's first run, there were maybe 15 of us inside that fence. And I found myself standing in the yard one evening, looking at what it had become. And it wasn't a place I was sitting for a night or two. It was a place people came to. And it was, I had to admit to myself, a better place because of who'd come. Not just because I'd stacked concrete, but because Renata could cook, and the old man could fix, and the electrician could see in the dark. That should have taught me something. It taught me something eventually, just not yet. Owen noticed the gaps before any of the grown-ups mentioned them out loud. He came and found me one morning with his chalk in his fist and his numbers all wrong. And he said, "The big wall got smaller." "Just the south part," I said. "We took 12 off the end." "Why?" "Because somebody else needed them," I said. It was the first time I'd said that out loud, plain to another person. And it was my 7-year-old grandson I said it to. He thought about it the way kids think, seriously, and then he said, "Are they going to bring them back?" And I opened my mouth to say, "Of course," the way you tell a kid whatever keeps the world simple. And I found I couldn't, because I already knew the barriers weren't coming back. You don't drive 4-ton concrete off a rescue lane while people are still trying to cross it. So I said, "No, buddy, not those ones. Those ones have a job now." He accepted that better than Diane would have. Bush came back on the 5th day, and I could see it on him before he'd cleared the chicane. Worse news doesn't so much get spoken as get carried, and he was carrying it in his shoulders. The near half of the lane, the part they'd left open, the part I'd said people could run, wasn't runnable anymore. What had changed was simple, and it was the thing you always forget when you plan around a photograph of a moment instead of a moving situation. People had been abandoning their vehicles. Every empty car on that approach was one more place for the sick to come out from behind. And the strip of dead businesses had gone from a source you could sprint past to a whole flank that was live the length of the stretch. The far half was protected. The near half had become the killing part. "We need to run the concrete all the way back to the top of the approach," Bush said. "Continuous lane, buildings on the left, drop off on the right, people walking the chute in the middle. It's the only way the rest of them get across." "How much is all the way back?" He'd already counted it, of course. He was a roadman. 24, he said. "Give or take, 24 more." I didn't say anything for a moment. 24 was not 12. 12 I'd pulled off a stack that didn't matter. There was no stack that didn't matter that had 24 left on it. I walked the yard while he waited, and I did the thing I do, which is the math, in tons and gallons and the physical shape of my own fence. To send 24, I'd have to take them from the west side. And the west side was where I'd built the offset that kept anything from driving straight at the office. It was the run of barrier between the side entrance and the building, the concrete that meant a vehicle coming in through the chicane had to turn again before it could reach the door where Owen slept. Pull that, and a truck coming through the gate wrong, or a cluster of the sick following a truck in, would have a straight open lane to the front of the office. There was no other 24 in the yard that I could load without dismantling something that was actually doing a job. So that was the choice, laid out in concrete. Not will be weaker. This. To build strangers a road all the way to the bridge, I would have to take down the wall standing between the gate and my grandson's window. And the people inside the fence had opinions. Nobody made a speech. It came up sideways, over the work, the way real disagreements do. The electrician, who'd rewired us and earned a voice, said quiet one evening that we were alive because that concrete was here. And every piece we drove off was a piece that wasn't. He wasn't wrong. Renata's father, the mechanic, said less, but I could tell he leaned the same way he'd survived by being behind a wall, and he wasn't in a hurry to give the wall away. Kayla, my own daughter, surprised me. She held Owen a little tighter those days, and she said not unkindly, "Dad, they're not our 40 people. Owen's our person." She wanted the barriers to stay. She had a child, and a child makes your circle very small and very bright. And I understood her completely. And part of me was glad somebody was saying the thing I wanted to say, so I didn't have to. Bush, of course, wanted them gone, not for himself, for the road. Every mile that concrete moves, he said, it's saving somebody. It's doing more good on that approach in a day than it'll do sitting in your yard in a year. Also not wrong. And Diane. Diane didn't take a side, exactly. What she did was worse. One night, after Owen was down, she found me out by the west offset with a flashlight, walking the barrier run, counting it. And she said, "How many do we actually need here, Frank?" I gave her a number. I'd already worked it out, of course. So many to hold the gate, so many for the west lane, so many in reserve. I laid it out for her, like a load plan. She listened to the whole thing. Then she said, "Need or want?" I didn't answer, and she didn't make me. She just clicked off her flashlight and went inside and left me standing in the dark with a run of concrete I could account for down to the section, but could not, when she put it that way, entirely defend. So I did what I do. I tried to build my way out of it. If the problem was that sending 24 meant losing the west offset, then the answer wasn't to choose. The answer was to replace the west offset with something else and send the barriers anyway. That's how my mind works. Point me at the wall, and I'll find you a substitute for the wall. I spent the better part of a day at it. I had the mechanic and Marcus and Reyes, when he was around, help me drag culvert sections into the gap big precast box culverts. Heavy in their own right. Not as good as barrier, but not nothing. I stacked loaded pallets of retaining block. I ran the second flatbed empty into the lane and parked it broadside as a rolling wall. It was clever. Some of it even worked. But it cost me a day of diesel and daylight. And every substitute had a flaw the real thing didn't. Culvert sections have a hollow you can crawl through. Pallets tip. A parked trailer is a wall until somebody needs the trailer, which I would, to haul the barriers I was freeing up by parking the trailer. And if you followed that circle around long enough, you ended up exactly where you'd started, which was a man trying very hard not to make a decision by making a great many small ones instead. Diane watched me do it. She never said the word avoiding. She didn't have to. I saw her see it one afternoon, when I was down on my knees checking the fit of a culvert section against the fence line, sweating, satisfied. And I looked up and she was standing there with 2 cups of coffee and an expression I'd been married to for 34 years and could read like a load chart. She handed me a cup. She said, "You're a good man to have around when a thing needs moving." And then she went back inside, and I sat there with my clever culverts and understood that she had just told me, as gently as anybody had ever told me anything, that not everything that needed doing was a thing that needed moving. The infected came at the east fence the next morning, following a pickup that came up the road too fast. It wasn't a horde. 8, maybe 10 of them, strung out along the pickup's wake, and the pickup driver panicked. No operator, just a scared man, tried the side entrance too fast, same as the box truck had, and got himself wedged in the chicane. But this time, there were 10 of the sick coming up behind him, and the wedged truck was holding my one door open, and for about a minute and a half, it was the worst it had been. I ran the loader. That's all. That's the whole heroic account of it. I dropped the bucket and I came across the yard, and I pushed that pickup driver and all. Him screaming, me not much better, straight through the chicane and clear of the opening. And then I dropped a spare barrier I kept staged for exactly this, into the gap behind him with the tailor, while the mechanic and Reyes got the pipe across the pedestrian gate. The sick hit the fresh concrete and the fence and did what they always did. They pushed, and it held, and they slid along it. And after a while, the noise died down, and they wandered back out toward the road. Nobody inside got touched. The pickup driver turned out to be alone and no use to anybody, and I let him stay anyway, because you can't push a man back out the door, you just pulled him through. And there it was again. My physical solution had worked. I'd put a machine on the problem, and the problem had gone away. 10 of them at my fence, and I'd answered it in tons, the way I'd answered everything. And it had held, which made the barriers even harder to give up. That's the trap I want you to see, because I couldn't see it from inside it. Every time the yard saved us, it built the case for keeping the yard exactly as it was. Every proof that the concrete worked here was one more reason not to send it there. Would you keep the wall that had already saved your family twice, or start taking it apart section by section, because somebody you'd never laid eyes on needed a road more than you needed a fortress? I asked myself that standing in the yard with the loader still running and my hands still shaking. And I did not have an answer. And I'm not sure I have a clean one now. Reyes came back that evening on foot, which frightened me before he even spoke, because you don't walk that industrial road by choice. But he was all right, just tired past the far side of tired. And he'd walked because the crew's truck was needed on the approach. He'd come to tell me 2 things. The first was proof, the kind Diane had wanted me to hear and I hadn't wanted to. The far lane my 12, plus what they'd scraped together, had moved people all day. He named one. A man in a wheelchair, he said. A big man. And they'd built a section of the chute a little wider so 2 people could get behind him and push. And they'd moved him the whole length of the protected lane and onto the bridge deck. And the man had cried. And the 2 who pushed him had cried. And Reyes, telling me, had to stop and look at my equipment for a second before he could go on. 12 barriers off my south stack. A man who'd have been left in the open, moved to safety behind concrete I'd poured for a highway job that no longer existed. The second thing was the ask, and he laid it out flat because he was too tired to dress it up. They were going for the rest before dawn. All the trapped families on the near side, the church van, the old folks. Whoever was left fuel was gone in most of the vehicles, and the weather turning meant the shoulder would be mud, and worse by afternoon. And once it was full light, the sick moved better and further along that whole live flank. So the crew had made the call. First light, protected or not, they were bringing everybody across. We can build the full lane before then, Reyes said. We've got the hours, barely. But we need the barriers tonight. We need the 24. And honestly, Frank, we need more than the 24. We need about everything you've got that'll set clean into a lane. He rubbed his face. And if we don't have it built by first light, they're going anyway. Bush already told them. They can't wait another day. So they'll walk that near stretch in the open, past every one of those buildings, in the daylight, with the sick moving good. He looked at me. You can't stop them from crossing. Nobody can. All that's up to you is whether they cross behind concrete or out in the wind. Then he went inside to eat and to sleep, and left me standing in the yard. It was full dark by then, that heavy river bottom dark. No traffic sound anymore because there was no traffic left. Just wind moving across the beans and way off across the flat. One set of headlights crawling toward the bridge that would be Bush staging. The electrician's small lights were on, low, gold on the concrete. Behind me, in the office, my wife and my daughter and my grandson were asleep. And around them slept the families who'd come because the road crew had told them, if you can't get through, go to the plant Renata and her boy, the mechanic, the electrician, the pickup man, who was no use and alive anyway. All of them behind the west offset, behind my walls. In the other direction, the rows stood under the lights, the north stack, the west offset that kept the gate off the office. Every clean 10-foot section I'd need to build that lane, and more, sitting right there. The flatbeds were empty and ready. The tailor was fueled. The loader was warm. Everything a man needed to drive that concrete out to the bridge before dawn and give 40 people a road was staged and waiting. And I knew, to the section and the gallon and the loader hour, exactly what I'd have to take apart to do it. I knew which wall would come down. I knew what the gate looked like without it. For 30 years, I'd built these things, believing a barrier's whole purpose was to keep the danger on the far side of it, to stop the moving thing, to hold the line, to say this far and no farther. That's what I'd made them for. That's what I'd used them for out here. And they'd done it, twice over, and my family was alive because of it. And now, a tired man asleep on my break room couch had asked me for nearly all of them, not to stop anybody, but for the thing I'd forgotten that they were really poor to do, to take frightened people by the shoulder and walk them past the worst of it, to turn a killing stretch into a lane you could cross, not a wall to hide behind, a road to get through on. The concrete could stay right where it was, standing guard over the people already safe. Or it could go out into the dark before morning and become a way through for the ones who weren't. I stood between the two of them a long time, the sleeping building on one side and the loaded rows on the other. And for the first time in my working life, I was looking at a problem I could put a machine on, and understanding that the machine wasn't the hard part at all. A man can stand and look at a problem a long time, but the load doesn't get any lighter for the looking. I don't remember making the decision so much as I remember turning around and walking toward the office, and my body having already decided somewhere below the part of me that talks. I went in quiet. The break room smelled like sleeping people and coffee gone stale. I found Diane awake. She's always half awake. 34 years of listening for me to come in from a shift, and I crouched down by the couch and said it low. "We're loading." She didn't ask which barriers. She knew which barriers. There was only one run in that yard, big enough to build a lane and worth losing sleep over, and it was the west offset, the one that put a turn between the side gate and the door she was lying 12 feet from. She sat up and looked at me in the dark for a second, and then she nodded once and said, "Wake Reyes." I woke Reyes. He came up out of sleep the way equipment men do, all at once, no fuss, already reaching for his boots. I told him what we were doing. He said, "How much?" "All the clean sections I've got that'll set into a lane, starting with the west run." He rubbed his face. "That's the one keeps the gate off the building. I know what it is." He looked at me a second longer, and then he did the thing I'd come to respect about him, which was that he didn't argue a decision that was already made. He said, "I'll fuel the second flatbed," and went out into the dark. Kayla woke because Reyes moving woke her, or because a mother sleeps even lighter than a wife. She came out to the yard doorway with a blanket around her shoulders and Owen's small shape still down behind her. And she watched me pulling on my work gloves, and she understood the whole thing before I said a word of it. "You're taking the west run," she said. "Yeah. That's the one in front of us." "I know." "That's the one in front of Owen." There wasn't any way to answer that except the true way, which was that she was right, so I didn't dress it up. "I know," I said again. She stood there gripping the blanket. She wasn't yelling. Kayla doesn't yell. She gets very quiet and very exact, same as she gets with a patient who's scared to put weight on a leg that won't hold them. And that quiet is worse than shouting, because you can hear her thinking. "They're going to cross at first light whether we help or not," she said, working it out loud. "That's what Reyes said. So you can't stop it. You can only—" She stopped. "You can only make it so we've got less wall, and they've got more. That's about the size of it. Diane came up behind her then, and I braced for the two of them together. But Diane didn't take my side, which would have been easy. And she didn't take Kayla's, which would have let me off the hook. What she did was harder. She put a hand on Kayla's shoulder, and she looked at me and she said, "Don't tell her it'll be just as safe out here." It won't. And I want to tell you, I argued. I had 4 different substitutes half built in my head already. Culvert in the gap, trailer broadside, pallets stacked. The box truck and every one of them wanted to come out of my mouth as proof that we'd be fine. But I'd stood out in that dark long enough to have run out of the strength to lie about it, even to make my daughter feel better. So I said the thing I'd never once said in 30 years of telling scared people their work zone was safe. "No," I said. "It won't be as safe. It'll be less safe. I'm going to make it as good as I can with what's left. And it still won't be what the concrete was." Kayla looked at me like she didn't quite recognize me. Diane looked at me like maybe she did. Then I went out and started taking apart the best thing I'd built. We ran the yard lights low, just the string the electrician had rigged. Gold pools on the concrete with dark between them. Cold had come in off the river, the kind of damp cold that gets into a shoulder. And our breath and the diesel exhaust hung together in the light. Reyes ran the loader for staging, and I ran the Taylor for the picks. Because those barriers had cast-in lifting loops, and I wanted my own hands on the chains for everyone that came off that run. You put a 4-leg chain on the 2 loops, you bring the boom up slow, you watch the legs take the strain even, and you feel the piece decide to leave the ground. Better than 2 tons apiece. You don't rush 2 tons in the dark. The first one I pulled was the section nearest the office. The one that made the turn. The whole reason the offset worked. I hooked it and brought it up, and it came off its spot clean. And where it had been, there was just a rectangle of cleaner concrete on the apron, a shape in the grime, the ghost of a wall. Reyes guided the butt end down onto the flatbed dunnage, and I set it, and the chains went slack, and that was one. The second and third came off the middle of the run. Every one I took, the shape of the yard changed. You could stand at the side gate now and see, in a straight line, all the way to the office door, the exact line I'd built that whole offset to break. A vehicle coming through the chicane fast would have a clear run at the building now. I knew it the way you know a tooth is gone by the space your tongue keeps going to. Owen woke on the 4th lift. I saw him at the office glass, blanket wrapped up to his chin, watching the boom swing. He didn't cry. He just watched. And after a while, Kayla came and stood behind him with her hands on his shoulders. And I saw her mouth moving, explaining. And I saw him nod the serious way he nods. Later she told me what he'd said. He'd pointed at the section coming up on the chains and said, real quiet, "That's our crooked wall." And she'd said yes. And he'd said, "Where's it going?" And I'd have told him they had a job, the way I'd been telling him since the first 12. But this time, Kayla answered before I could, over the little handheld I'd clipped to my vest so we could talk gate to yard. Her voice came out of it flat and careful. "It's going to build a road for people who can't get across," she said, "so nothing gets to them while they walk." It was the first time she'd said it like that. Not they're not our people, not Owen's our person. She'd said it the road crew way, the way Bush would have said it. And I stopped the boom for a second in the cold, and I didn't say anything back over the radio, because there wasn't anything to add to it. We got 22 off the west run, and staged 8 more from the north stack. 30 sections total. The first loads went onto the 2 flatbeds, with the rest staged for the return run. Then I did what I could with what was left, and I want to be honest about how little that was. I dragged 3 box culvert sections into the worst of the gap with the loader heavy, but hollow, with an opening a person could crawl through if a person were desperate and small. I put a loaded pallet of retaining block at either end of the culverts. I backed the empty box truck across the straight shot to the office and set the brake and let the air down out of the tires so it'd sit stubborn. It wasn't a wall. It was a pile of things that were heavy and a truck that had glass and doors and could be moved by anybody with a mind to. The electrician came out and helped me chain the pallets down so they wouldn't tip. And he looked at the whole arrangement when we were done, and he didn't say it was good. And I appreciated that he didn't. I couldn't take everybody, and I couldn't leave everybody. That math I could do. Diane and Kayla stayed with Owen and the 2 civilian families, and Renata and her boy, and the mechanic, too old for the road, but sharp on the radio and sharper on a wrench if the loader I was leaving them acted up. The electrician stayed to run the lights and the pedestrian gate. I gave the mechanic the loader keys, and I showed him and Diane and Kayla the emergency plan, which was mostly keep the pedestrian gate the only way anybody comes in on foot. And if a vehicle comes fast, use the parked box truck and the loader to pinch the lane, and don't try to be heroes about it. The pickup man, the one I'd pulled through the chicane, the one I'd written off as no use to anybody, came out in the cold while I was checking the straps on the flatbeds. He stood around the way a man stands around when he wants to be asked. Finally, he said, I could ride along, carry things, whatever. He shrugged. I'm not much, but I've got a back. I almost told him to stay out of the way. I'd have told him that a week before. But Reyes needed a hand on the road end that didn't require knowing anything, just doing what he was told and not freezing, and a man with a back who wanted to use it was worth more right then than a man with a skill who wanted to be left alone. Get in the truck, I said. You do exactly what Reyes or I tell you. When we tell you, and you keep your hands off anything on chains. Yes, sir, he said, and climbed up like I'd handed him something. We rolled out through the side gate a little before 3 in the morning. 2 flatbeds, heavy and low. Bushes dually leading, me riding with Reyes. Behind us, the yard glowed low and gapped, and my whole family stood inside it, with less concrete between them and the dark than there'd been at bedtime, and I made myself look at the road ahead instead of the mirror. The industrial road ran dead and black. Then the state highway, dead too. Traffic lights out, hanging over the intersections dark, and abandoned cars pushed onto the shoulders where the road crew had cleared a lane days back. You could see their reflective tape catching our headlights. Little strips they'd tied to mirrors so a night driver would know the lane was theirs. Dark commercial buildings. A gas station with its canopy lights out and its doors standing open. Once, far off across the bottomland, a smudge of orange where something was burning that nobody was going to put out. And movement, here and there, at the edges of the lights, a shape by a building. A shape crossing a lot, turning toward the diesel sound, and then falling behind as we passed. Bush kept us at a steady crawl. Fast draws them and loses you room to react. Slow keeps the lane yours. I'd argued about these people for the better part of a week from behind my fence. I'd made them into a number. 40, 50, a quantity of concrete required. Bush's dually came off the highway onto the bridge approach, and his brake lights washed red over the whole scene, and I saw them. And the number went away and did not come back. They were spread up the approach behind the last stretch of stalled vehicles. In the dark, in the cold, maybe 40 of them, maybe a few more. A church van sat nose in against the guardrail with its windows fogged white from the breath inside. And I could see the shapes of the heads in it, a lot of heads for one van. An old man sat in a lawn chair somebody had set up between 2 dead cars, wrapped in a quilt, upright. keeping watch or maybe just too tired to lie down. There was a woman with a green oxygen bottle in a little wheeled cart. The concentrator dead now, dragging the bottle behind her because it was hers, and you don't leave the thing that keeps you breathing. A man stood near the front with a road flare he'd lit down to a stub, holding it up, not because it did much, but because a person needs to be doing something. And holding up a light was something. A father sat on a cooler with a kid asleep across his lap. And he had his coat off and over the kid, and he was in his shirt sleeves in that cold. And he didn't look like he'd noticed. Nobody was calm, but nobody was screaming either. They were doing the thing frightened people do when they've been frightened a long time, which is get very quiet and very still and wait, and watch every set of headlights to see if it's the one that's coming to help or the one that's coming to make it worse. Bush met me at the front of the flatbed. He pointed up the approach with his chin. "There's your 12, he said. And there they were. My first 12, set down the far half of the stretch past the gas station, right where I'd told him to put the worst of it. They were filthy already, scraped along the tops where things had dragged against them. One of them shoved a few inches out of line where a vehicle had kissed it. Somebody had spray-painted a crude arrow on the third one, pointing the way through, and tied a strip of reflective tape to the end of the last one so people would know where the protected parts started. Ugly, beautiful, doing exactly the one thing they were poured to do. Your 12 did their job, Bush said. I looked at the placement first. I couldn't help it. I checked the alignment, the spacing, whether the ends were closed or open. That's who I am. Only after I'd read the geometry did the rest of it reach me. The arrow, the tape, the fact that an old man had gone up that lane on a cane and a father had carried a sleeping girl past those painted numbers. "They're not mine anymore," I said. And it came out rougher than I meant. So I turned and started pulling my gloves tighter and told Reyes to spot the first flatbed. There was a state loader already staged on the approach, a big articulated thing the road crew had brought up days ago, and a small crane truck with an outrigger boom parked behind the church van. Reyes knew it, had run it before. That was the plan. We haul the concrete up on the flatbeds, and their equipment sets it. Because you don't drive a yard forklift 6 miles down a state highway, and you don't need to when there's a loader already sitting where the work is. Bush's crew, 2 more men I hadn't met, quiet and worn, knew the road end. My job was the concrete. Their job was the road. That's how it was supposed to split. Except it didn't stay split, because I couldn't leave it split. We got the first sections coming off the flatbed, and I was up in the middle of it, checking the chain on a pick, then walking down to eyeball the alignment on the last one set. Then back to tell Reyes to hold while I looked at where the next one wanted to go, then over to wave the pickup man back from a spot he shouldn't have been standing. I was doing 4 jobs and doing all of them a half step behind, the way you do when you're doing 4 jobs. And Bush watched me do it for about 10 minutes, and then he came over and put a hand flat on my chest, not hard, just there, and said, "Del, pick a job." I looked at him. "You can't run the picks and set the line and mind the civilians and talk to Reyes all at once," he said. "Pick one. I've got the people. Reyes has got the crane. You know the concrete better than any man alive. Read me the line and load the trucks and quit trying to do my job and his." I stood there with his hand on my chest, and something in me wanted to argue, because the wanting to argue was the same thing that had made me build 4 substitute walls instead of making one choice. If I wasn't doing all of it, was I doing enough? If somebody else set the barrier, did the barrier still count as mine? That's a stupid way to think, and I knew it was stupid even while I was thinking it. But knowing a load is rigged wrong, and being able to set it down are two different things. "Read you the line," I said finally. "Load the trucks." "There you go," Bush said, and took his hand off my chest and went to go do the thing he was better at than me, which was talk to 40 scared people and keep them from running before it was time. If you've stayed with me this long, I'm grateful for it. And if this is the kind of story you come back for ordinary people trying to use what little they know when there isn't a clean answer anywhere in sight, I'd be glad to have you subscribe. Because I'd spent a week reducing those families to a number of concrete sections. And now I was standing right in front of them with the last of my walls on 2 flatbeds behind me, and God help me, I was still reading the line and counting pieces, because counting was the only thing I knew how to do with my hands that didn't shake. The line went in slow, the way night road work goes in slow. Reyes ran the crane truck and set the sections one at a time, and I stood where I could see the whole run and called them tighter or looser, closed this end, left that one open for the loader to get back out. The principle was the same as the yard, only turned inside out. In the yard, I'd used the concrete to keep everything on the far side. Here we were using it to make a chute buildings and their open doors on the left, the guardrail and the drop on the right, and a clear walking lane down the middle wide enough for people to move without touching what came out of those doors. We ran it back from my first 12 toward the top of the approach, closing the gap between the protected part and where the people waited. Reyes set a section, and I started to tell him to bring it in tighter to the last one. Close the joint. He held up a hand and pointed down at the pavement. "You close that. The wheelchair can't make the turn around the van," he said. "Leave it offset. Give him the swing." I opened my mouth to tell him the tighter joint was stronger. Then I looked at where he was pointing. At the woman with the oxygen bottle who'd be behind whoever was in the chair. At the width they'd need to get a chair and a person pushing it around the nose of that van. And he was right. He was right, and I'd have said it wrong. "Leave it offset," I said. "Give him the swing." Reyes set it offset. Small thing. It stuck with me more than a lot of bigger things did. The radio on my vest crackled. Diane's voice, thin over the miles. "We're fine, just checking in. How's the road?" "Slow," I said. "Going in. You good?" "We're good. Mechanic's got the loader idling in case. Owen's back asleep." A pause. "Frank, there's a car sitting out on the industrial road with its lights off. It's not coming in, just sitting." I felt the whole thing want to pull me back, the wanting to be there. The wanting to put my body between the yard and whatever was out on that road. "Anybody in it?" I said. "Can't tell. It's just sitting." "Keep the pedestrian gate closed. Don't send anybody out to look. If it moves, tell me." I stood there gripping the radio, and I could feel Bush watching me, and I made myself clip it back on my vest and turn back to the line. And it was one of the harder things I did that night, turning back to the line. We got most of the run in before the trouble at the other end started. And both kinds of trouble came about the same time, which is how it always goes. The car on the industrial road wasn't nothing. It came up on the yard fast, about an hour before dawn. Diane's voice on the radio suddenly not thin anymore. Sharp, a sedan with somebody driving scared and 3 or 4 of the 6 strung out behind it, drawn by the engine. And here's the part I have to own. If the west offset had still been standing, that sedan would have hit the chicane and been forced into the slow turn. And the 6 behind it would have been redirected down the fence the way they always were. But the west offset was on my flatbeds. What the sedan hit instead was my box culvert and pallet arrangement. And it did not do the same thing. The sedan came through the side gate too fast, clipped a pallet of retaining block, and knocked it half over, and slewed deep into the yard, deep. Right up the straight line I'd spent 2 hours failing to properly block, almost to the office door. And 2 of the sick followed it in through the gate before anybody could drop the pipe. I heard it all in pieces over the radio, standing on a bridge approach 6 miles away with a barrier hanging on the crane. And every part of me that had been a father and a foreman for 30 years wanted to drop everything and drive. I actually took 2 steps toward Bush's dually. Bush caught my arm. He didn't say much. He said, "Can they handle it?" And I didn't know. That was the truth. I didn't know. Because I'd never in my life let anybody handle a physical problem I could put my own hands on. Then Kayla came on the radio. Not Diane, Kayla. She was breathing hard, but her voice was doing the thing it did with the scared patients. Steady laid over top of not steady. "Dad, we've got it. The mechanic's pinching the gate with a loader. The 2 of them are still outside the office glass. We're moving everybody to the back room. The driver's a woman and a kid. They're okay. They're inside." A breath. "Stay there. Finish the lane. We've got the gate." I stood there with Bush's hand on my arm, and the crane holding 2 tons of concrete over a stranger's road, and I did not believe her. Not because she wasn't capable. Because believing her meant believing that a problem I could physically solve could get solved by somebody who wasn't me. And my whole life had told me that was the same as not getting solved at all. "Put your mother on," I said. Diane came on. "She's right," Diane said. "She's had this handled since before she called you. The mechanic used the loader bucket like you showed him. The gate's pinched. The 2 that got in are on the wrong side of the box truck, and the electrician's leading them off with a light down the far fence. Nobody's hurt. Frank..." And here her voice did something it almost never does. It got firm with me, flat and firm. She said, "We've got it. We've got it. Finish what you went there to do." I looked up at the barrier on the crane. I looked down the half-built lane at the 40 people waiting behind it, at the father in his shirt sleeves, at the fogged van full of heads. I looked at the 2 flatbeds still loaded. "Set it," I told Reyes. "Bring the next one up." And I stayed. I want to be clear that it did not feel like growth. It felt like the worst thing I'd ever made myself do. Standing on that road, choosing not to go rescue my own family from a problem I knew exactly how to fix. But Kayla had said they had it. And Diane had said they had it. And the only thing left for me to do was find out whether that could be true by not going, which was the only way you ever find out. They had it. I'll tell you now so you're not sitting there worrying the way I was. The mechanic and the electrician and Kayla and 2 men from the civilian families walked those 2 sick ones down the far fence with a lantern and let them out a service gate on the east side and pinned it shut behind them. And they righted the pallet in the morning. And the woman and the kid who'd come in, scared, turned out to be all right. Just terrified. No hero in it. 5 people in a loader, and the layout doing most of the work, even half torn down. The yard held without me, and without the wall I'd been so sure was the only thing holding it. And I've thought about that more than I've thought about almost anything since. But I didn't know all that yet. What I knew, on the road, as the black started going gray, was that I'd chosen to stay, and now I had to make the staying worth it. That's when Bush found the problem the plan couldn't have known about. He came back down the line with a flashlight and his face set wrong. "Trailers shifted," he said. The jackknifed rig at the narrow point, the whole reason the approach had choked down to 1 lane, had settled overnight. A tire had gone flat, and the air had bled out of the suspension, and the trailer had leaned toward the guardrail. And the gap we'd planned to run the lane through was narrower than Bush had measured it days before. Narrow enough for a person to squeeze. Not narrow enough for a wheelchair. Not for two adults carrying a third. Not for a line of scared church van people moving together without one of them stepping out of the protected width and into the open. Our lane, built straight the way we'd planned it, was going to funnel 40 people into a bottleneck they couldn't get a chair through. "We need to carry the line back," Bush said. "Reshape it wider before the pinch. Run it around the trailer nose instead of past it. That's more concrete than the 24. More than the 24. Of course it was. It was always going to be more than the 24. I'd known that in some back part of me when I loaded the 8 reserve sections. And now here was the road telling me the reserve wasn't reserve either. It all had to go. And I saw right off another way, because that's how my mind works. It doesn't ask should first, it asks can. And the answer was yes. "Move the trailer," I said. "We don't need more concrete if we get the width back. Shift the nose 4 feet toward the channel and the gap opens up, and the line we've already got is enough." Bush shook his head. "Loaded trailer on a bad approach? In the dark? Tire flat? You start dragging that, and it can go over the guardrail and take the loader with it. Leave it. Build around it." "We can shift it 4 feet," I said. "Not tow it. Just crab the nose over with the loader and a chain on the 5th wheel. 4 feet. I've dragged worse across worse." "Del, 4 feet, Ort. It's the difference between using what we've got and needing another 10 sections we don't have staged." He looked at me a long time. And I was right about the physics, understand? That's the thing I have to make you see. I was right. We could shift it. And it did open the gap. And it did save us the extra concrete. I hooked the chain on the 5th wheel myself and rigged it clean. And Reyes crabbed the nose over with the loader slow and careful, and the trailer groaned and moved and did not go over the rail. And the gap opened up. And I was right the whole way through. But it took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of me down under that trailer in the cold, rigging it perfect, and Reyes working it inch by inch because I'd told him inch by inch, and Bush standing there with 40 people behind him, going grayer and grayer, against a sky that was going grayer too. And when it was done, and the gap was open, and I climbed out from under it, filthy and pleased with myself, Bush was standing there, not pleased at all. "That's real nice work," he said. "You just spent your first crossing window making it nice." I opened my mouth. "Good enough moves, people," he said. "Perfect gets people caught here when the sun comes up. We could have built around it in 20 minutes with the extra sections and had a group across by now. Instead, you fixed the trailer." He wasn't angry. That was the worst of it. He was just telling me. "The concrete doesn't care if it's perfect, Del. The people care if they're across." And I stood there, covered in road grime with a chain in my hand, having done a thing right, and understood that doing the thing right had been the wrong thing to do. That's a hard one to carry. It's not that I couldn't solve the problem. It's that I believed solving it perfectly made it correct. And the sky coming up gray over that gas station did not agree with me. We stopped perfecting after that. There wasn't time to do anything but use it. The light came up dirty and cold, and with the light came more of the sick, not because morning made them anything, but because now they could see. And we could see them a dozen and more, spread along the commercial strip, drawn toward the movement and the diesel. And once we started, the sound of people. They came off the lots and out of the open doors and toward us, and they hit the concrete. And the concrete did the only thing it knows how to do. It sent them along itself. A man in a torn coat came at the line, dead on, and hit a barrier face and slid down it and got turned the way the geometry turned him, away, along, off the open end, where there was nobody. The danger was never the middle of the line. The danger was always the ends, the gaps, the joints, and Bush's men worked the ends with a truck and a length of pipe, and their voices, drawing the sick off toward the closed end and away from where the people were. Bush started sending groups. Not everybody. 4, 5, 6 at a time. Families kept together, called forward when the line was clear and held back when it wasn't. The father in his shirt sleeves went first with the sleeping kid, and the pickup man, the useless pickup man, walked beside him with a hand near the kid's back, not touching, just there, and carried the man's cooler so the man only had to carry the child. Then the church van emptied out group by group, and the pickup man walked each group back and forth, up the protected lane and back down the outside where the equipment held the gap, carrying bags, holding a light, saying whatever quiet nothing a person says to keep other people moving. No skill in it, just a back and a willingness to use it. I'd looked at that man a week before and seen nothing worth feeding. I watched him make 11 trips up that lane, and I revised my whole accounting of what a person is worth. And I didn't say anything about it to him, then or ever, because some things you just fix inside yourself and let be. The old man with the quilt went up the lane in his lawn chair, 4 men carrying it, because he couldn't walk it and wouldn't leave the chair. The woman with the oxygen bottle went up dragging her dead bottle, and nobody made her leave it. And I stood at the point Bush had given me to mind. One placement, one joint, watching the concrete do the thing I'd made concrete do my whole life without ever once understanding it. I thought a barrier's job was to stop a moving thing. It isn't. Its job is to tell a moving thing where it's allowed to go. And there is a whole world of difference between those two. And I was 59 years old standing on a bridge approach at dawn before I felt that difference in my chest instead of just knowing it in my hands. By then, there wasn't much left in that yard I could rightly call spare. And there were still people on the near side who hadn't crossed. So let me put it to you the way it put itself to me, standing there with the sun coming up. If the wall around your own family had already been cut down to culverts, and a truck with the air let out of its tires, and the concrete in front of you was still, right that minute, walking somebody's grandmother out of the dark, where exactly would you decide you'd given enough? I didn't have the number. I'd had a number for everything my whole life, and right then, I didn't have one. The last group was the hard one. It's always the last group. 2 old folks, a couple, moving slow, a woman with a bad hip and a cane, and the man in the wheelchair, the same one Reyes had built the offset for, whose family had gotten him this far and couldn't get him the last stretch fast enough, because the sick had shifted with the light and were coming heavy now toward the top of the approach, toward the very end of the line where the last group waited. And the protected part was all down at the far end where the earlier groups had crossed. And here's the thing the whole night had been building to, though I didn't see it as a shape until it was on me. The lane behind the crossed groups was doing nothing now. It was just concrete standing in a place people had already left. And the last group needed protection at the top, where there wasn't any, where all the sick were coming. "Leapfrog it," Bush said. "Pull from behind, set ahead, walk the protection up to them." So that's what we did, and it was the hardest work of the night, and the simplest idea in it. We took the barriers the earlier groups had already used and no longer needed, and we picked them up off the back of the line and set them at the front, ahead of the last group, closing the top of the approach where the sick were coming, building the wall forward as the people moved forward, taking it apart behind them, a lane that wasn't a lane anymore, but a thing that moved, protection that traveled with the people instead of sitting still and waiting for them to reach it. There were too many pieces moving at once for one man to run. I knew it, and for once, I didn't fight it. Bush took the top end, calling the sick off, holding the gap with a truck. Reyes ran the crane, picking from behind and setting ahead. And I gave him the picks and let him make his own calls on placement because there was no time to check his. And he was right more than I'd have been anyway. I minded 1.1 joint, one closure, the seam between the moving front and the last group. And I minded only that. And the pickup man walked the wheelchair up between the barriers with the man's grown son, easing it over the joints as we set them. And somebody I never got the name of managed the old couple, and it worked. It worked because no one person could see the whole of it, and no one person had to. It worked because it wasn't mine. I'd spent 30 years believing a thing only got done right if I did it. And it took a moving wall at dawn to show me a job could be done better by 6 people who each did one part than by one man trying to do all 6.5 steps behind. The crane truck's boom quit on the second to last pick. It just sagged, mid-lift, a barrier hanging on the chain, and the boom stopping where it had no business stopping, a hydraulic line let go somewhere, the pressure gone, the piece hanging dead in the air. Reyes got it set down safe, barely. And then the boom wouldn't come back and wouldn't lift. And there we were with the last barrier we needed, and no machine to set it, and the sick coming at the top end, and the last group not across. And every cell in my body went toward that boom. I know hydraulics. I could see it, the line, the fitting. I could have it patched in 20 minutes. I had the mechanic's mind, if not his hands. And stopping to fix it was the most natural thing in the world. The thing I'd have done every single day of my working life. You don't leave a machine broke, you fix the machine. The machine is the whole point. I was already moving toward it. I had a wrench half out. "Del," Reyes said. Not loud. "Leave it." I looked at him. I looked at the boom, the fitting, 20 minutes of work I could see in my hands, like it was already done. I looked at the last barrier sitting on the ground where he'd set it. "We don't need it lifted," Reyes said. "We need the people up. Loader's still good. We push the last group up behind what we've already got, and we send them across without that piece. It's not perfect. It moves them." He was throwing my own night back at me. And he knew it. And he had the decency not to smile about it. Leave the truck. For 30 years, I had never once walked away from a machine I could fix. Not once. It wasn't in me. I put the wrench back in the pouch. "Leave the truck," I said. And I left it. I turned my back on a boom truck I could have had running in 20 minutes. And I walked up to my one joint and minded my one joint. And we pushed the last group up behind the concrete we already had. No extra section. Good enough. And the loader held the top end. And the pickup man and the son ran the wheelchair over the last joint. And the old couple came behind, and the woman with the cane, and they went across. Not perfect. Nobody caught. Everybody up and over and onto the bridge deck, where the road ran clear to the west. I stood there in the full gray morning and watched the last of them go. 40-some people who had been a number to me for a week. Walking away west between rows of concrete I'd poured for a highway job that didn't exist anymore. And behind them, the leapfrogged lane stood half torn down and scattered and ugly, and I have never in my life been prouder of anything I made. We didn't save the town. I want to be square about that. We saved one group off one approach on one morning. There were people out in that gray somewhere we never saw and never helped, and I don't know what became of them, and neither do you, and neither did anybody. This isn't the kind of story where the numbers come out even at the end. It's just the kind where you do the one thing in front of you and hope it counts for the ones behind it. When it was over, Bush stood next to me looking at all my concrete strung out down that approach, filthy and scraped and doing its work. You want us to start pulling your sections? He said. Load 'em back up, take 'em home. Your yard's naked, Del. You could use 'em. I looked at the lane. There were more headlights coming down the highway. Way off, more people, always more people, moving west toward the one crossing that worked. The concrete was going to keep working, whether I was standing there or not. No, I said. Leave the lane. He nodded like he'd expected it. It'll draw more. Yeah, that's the idea. I looked at the boom truck I'd left broke, sitting there dead and fixable at the edge of the light. And it cost me something to look at it and not walk over, but it cost me less than I'd have guessed. Leave the truck too. Somebody'll want it. Tell whoever comes there's a yard 6 miles east with a mechanic in it, and a loader, and a man who knows how the concrete goes if they need more lane built somewhere. Send 'em our way. That's what the yard became in the end. Not a fortress, not a settlement with me at the head of a table telling everybody how it was going to be. A place people passed through, got a tire fixed, got a load of barrier for a bad stretch somewhere, got word of which roads still ran, got a night out of the wind, and moved on. A staging point, a repair point, a place that was useful because things moved through it, not because things stayed. I drove back east in the full daylight with Reyes and the empty flatbeds and the pickup man asleep against the door. And I came up the industrial road to my own yard, and I saw it the way a stranger would. The west run gone. Box culverts jammed in the gap. A pallet knocked half over from the sedan and set back up crooked. The box truck sitting on its rims across the line to the office. Gaps in the north stack. It looked like a place that had been half torn down and half defended by tired people, which is exactly what it was. Through the gap where my best wall used to stand, I could see straight out across the bean bottom to the grain elevators, open farmland gone gold in the morning. And it did not look like a hole in my defenses. It just looked like a place you could see out of now. Kayla met me at the pedestrian gate. She had Owen on her hip, even though he's too big to be carried. The way you carry a kid you've been scared about, even after the scare is over. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said anything smart. Then she said, I still hated watching you take that wall. I know. I hated it the whole time. I stood here half the night hating it. She shifted Owen up. And then a woman came through the gate at 4 in the morning with a little girl, scared out of her mind, and I got them settled. And about an hour later, I asked her how they'd gotten this far, which way they'd come. She stopped. She said they came through a lane somebody built at the bridge, barriers. She said they walked her mother across in a wheelchair. Kayla's jaw did something. So I sat there the rest of the night with two things true at the same time and no way to put them down. That the wall you took off Owen's window walked that woman's mother out of the dark. And that if that sedan had come 10 minutes different, it might have cost us Owen. She looked at me steady. Both of those are true. I'm not going to pick one to make it easier. No, I said. Don't. They're both true. She nodded, and that was the whole reconciliation, if you want to call it that. No speeches. She still wanted a strong fence around her boy. She just didn't believe anymore that safe meant keeping every heavy thing inside the wire. And I didn't believe anymore that I could keep her safe by being the only one allowed to move it. Owen looked at the gap where the west run used to be. When are our walls coming back? He said. Some aren't, I told him. He thought about it. Because they're working? Yeah, bud, I said. Because they're working. He seemed satisfied with that, more satisfied than most of the grown-ups had been, and squirmed down off his mother's hip and went to go find his chalk, which he'd left somewhere in all the moving. Diane was over by the box truck. The mechanic had it up on a jack, pulling a wheel to see if the rim was ruined from the sedan clipping it. And Marcus was down beside him, handing tools, learning, the way a kid learns when somebody lets him. Diane watched me watch them. She could see me wanting to go over there. She could see the wheel needing done, and the man doing it, and the part of me that thought it wasn't done right unless I did it. I didn't go over. I stood there with my wife and let another man pull a wheel I could have pulled faster, and Diane saw me not go. And she didn't say, "I'm proud of you," and she didn't say, "I knew you had it in you," because that's not who she is, and this isn't that kind of story. She just leaned into my shoulder for a second, tired, and said, "There's coffee if the mechanic didn't drink it all." And that was more than a speech would have been worth. I did drive past the bridge again, weeks later, on a fuel run west. The lane was still there. Filthier, longer. Somebody had added sections we didn't put down, extended it clear onto the deck. People moving through it, both directions now, not hiding behind it, moving through it, which was the whole difference I'd been 30 years learning. And on one section near the near end, low down where a small boy could reach it, there was a chalk drawing gone to a ghost in the weather. A lopsided sun, maybe, or a dog. You couldn't really tell anymore. The rain had taken most of it. That barrier had come off the row Owen used to draw on, back when the walls were his and he counted them wrong, and I never corrected him. I slowed down, but I didn't stop. There were people behind that concrete, walking west into whatever the day was going to be. And the last thing they needed was some old man stopping his truck to look at a chalk mark. So I let it go by in the mirror, the faded sun and the moving people and the ugly, beautiful line of it. And I drove on. And I thought that of all the things I ever built, to keep the danger on the far side, the best one I ever made turned out to be the one that finally let people through it. Then I quit thinking about it, because there was a stretch of bad road up ahead somebody was going to have to figure out how to get across, and I had a yard full of concrete and a crew of people who'd learned to move it without me, and there was work to do.